Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I head out for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good morning, listeners. There's a plane flying overhead. I'm walking near a busy road, so this is not the cleanest recording, but you'll have to make do. It is Friday morning, April 22nd, and I am out for a nice stroll here in suburban Chicago. My daughter has swim practice, and so I'm going for a walk along a relatively busy road into a neighborhood nearby. So I've mentioned a couple times as I've gone through different things about the games I play and the games I enjoy, that there may be a tectonic shift in my consideration of favorite designer. Those of you who've been listening to the podcast, I guess this is my fourth year doing this podcast, right? Third year? Fourth year? Third year? Those of you who've been listening to my podcast for a while know that my favorite designer is Martin Wallace. Martin Wallace is one of the first designers whose names I learned as somebody who started appreciating board games. You know, I started collecting board games more deeply around 2009, 2010. One of the games I bought, one of the first games I bought on Kickstarter was the game A Study in Emerald. A Study in Emerald, part of what I was interested in was that it was a game based on the incredible Neil Gaiman short story. But the Kickstarter promoting it said from legendary game designer Martin Wallace. I'd never heard of Martin Wallace and wasn't really following hobby games at that point. But I remembered, from legendary game designer Martin Wallace, this guy must be great. And when I got A Study in Emerald, it was great. I thought it was really cool, really weird, lots to think about. And so his name stuck in my head, and I started to notice his name on all these other games that were very well thought of. I picked up Brass and thought that was incredible. And so then I started collecting his games. When I would see his name on a game, I would pick it up. And eventually, the breadth of things that he's done in his games, the likelihood that I would find them really fascinating and interesting, all led me to decide that Martin Wallace was my favorite game designer. But in the last couple years, I've discovered there's another designer who knows how to make a game I will go crazy for, and that is Vladimir Suhi, or Suhi. Vladimir Suhi, of course, the designer Last Will is the first game of his that I encountered, but he's made a number of other incredible titles, and his last few have been knockdown, drag-out winners in my book. And so, with those things in mind, it leads me to the question of, should I change my allegiance? Do I call Martin Wallace my favorite game designer, or do I call Vladimir Suhi my favorite game designer? I know it's a really big deal. That's very important in the grand scheme of things. Who am I going to call my favorite game designer? I know you're dying to know, and we'll figure it out. We're not figuring it out today. This is going to be a multi-step process. I'm thinking 5 episodes, at least 3. It's going to take at least 3 episodes to really decide this. But I'm going to lay it out for you today. Today's going to be the catalog survey. So this is what games from each designer have I played, and a quick impression of them. I'm going to have to move quick because this podcast is generally between 15 and 25 minutes, and if I take very long on any one of the games, I will run out of time. So, Martin Wallace is the reigning champ. We'll start with him. I was looking through my Board Game Geek collection. I have 17 Martin Wallace games in my collection. It's a pretty big number. It is not nearly all of his games, though. I'd say if I had to guess, he has at least 40 titles, maybe more. Some of them as light as like the Doctor Who card game, which is a very light thing. Some of them heavy, something like Age of Steam, which he was involved with. I'm not sure if he's the credited designer on that one. Okay, anyway. So here are the 16 games. I'm just going to run through them in the alphabetical order that I have. I'll comment on them for a moment. The Arrival is about the prehistoric invasion of Ireland by the Fairy Kings. An interesting game. Actually, I'm going to put him in categories because he's experimented with a few different things, and I want to kind of highlight these. So The Arrival, Australia, A Study in Emerald, and MOA are all area control games that have some level of working with the enemy. Now, Studying Emerald is different from the other three. The Arrival, Moa, and Australia all have... Oh, actually, no. See, it's so hard to categorize these. Australia and Studying Emerald both have this element of the elder gods trying to take over things. Moa and The Arrival both have this element of working with... They're semi-co-op games, so everybody could lose. Actually, they're games where the win condition flips. If the evil force in the game gets too strong, then the other side wins. So that's how those games are connected. We have some economic games. We have aeroplanes. I've got Brass, both Brass Lancashire and Brass Birmingham. We have Steam. Those are all kind of economic games. You could also call Via Nebula an economic game. Via Nebula and Steam are very similar, I believe, although I haven't gotten to play Steam yet, but it seems like they do a lot of the same things. Then we've got his deck building card management games. A Few Acres of Snow was the first one and perhaps the best well known. A Handful of Stars and Mythotopia and A Study in Emerald all follow that recipe as well. Then we've got some standouts. I mentioned Australia already, but we have London, which you all know I really love London. We have Moonga Invaders, which is just a weird mess of a game. I don't even know if I've completed a full game of it yet. Very, very difficult to play. And then Onward to Venus, which is really, really good. That's a game I need to get back to the table. And Nanty Narking. Now, all of these are really interesting games. Many of them have strange win conditions. You know, Nanty Narking it's a redo of Discworld Ankh-Morpork, and it involves a mysterious win condition, so you don't know how you're going to win. So that part's really, you don't know which you're trying to win while figuring out keeping the other players from winning, and each person has their own win condition. That's great. Onward to Venus is a really strange game with lots of unusual mechanisms that I haven't seen in other games. I already talked about us studying Emerald a number of times on this podcast. So Martin Wallace, part of what makes his design so fascinating is that he's always experimenting, that he's trying out new combinations of things. It's really common to find something unexpected in his game. That sounds weird. It's common to find something unexpected. You don't know what you're going to get when you get a Wallace game. You're going to get something weird, something you haven't tried before. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, but they're always really interesting. So those are the 17 Martin Wallace games that I have. I will admit, I did not mention Lincoln, which is a game about the Civil War. That one seems to be another of these card management games. I haven't gotten to try it yet myself, but there's Lincoln. And then the other two games I haven't played yet are Steam and Aeroplanes. I did mention both of those, but I haven't gotten to try them yet. Those are games I picked up for modest prices used at various stores. Martin Wallace is definitely one of those designers where if I find a game of his and it's at a reasonable price used, I'll get it. I mean, it's worth a try, right? He's my favorite designer, or has been. So, like I said, 17 games in my collection. Those are the games that I called out. All right, let's move on to Vladimir Suhi. Like I said, I came across Vladimir Suhi at first playing Last Will, which I really, really liked. Then I got to try, what was the next one I tried? I mean, I feel like with Suhi it was aspirational almost. Like I loved Last Will so much that I wanted to try his other games. That every time I would watch a video or read a review of one of his other games, it would also strike me as incredible. I think the next one I got was Pulsar 2849, which again, really cool. Lots of neat systems. Then I picked up Shipyard, and before I even played Shipyard, I had decided, you know what, I really like what Vladimir Suhi is doing. And I looked and he only had 8 games, I think, on the market. So I said, you know what, I'm going to get them all. I am a collector. I do enjoy this sort of thing. Somewhere in there, Underwater Cities came out, and boy, that game's tight. Really, really great. So here's all the games in order. League of Six, 20th Century, Shipyard, Last Will, Prodigal's Club, Underwater Cities, Pulsar 2849, and Praga Kaput Regni. I feel like I'm missing one, but I can't think of what it is. So it's possible that I'm missing one. Now, I would say there's been a couple different, broadly speaking, a couple different modes of his games. I would say League of Six and 20th Century are both very similar in that they have auctions as a central mechanism in those games. I will say Last Will and Prodigal's Club as kind of action point games with a little bit of worker placement in them they're kind of similar. Underwater Cities and Praga Kaput Regni are both very similar games in that you're building. I mean, they play very different, so calling them very similar is ridiculous. In terms of Underwater Cities, it's a worker placement game with a hand management element. In Praga Kaput Regni, it is, I guess it's action selection. It's kind of like a rondel, but you don't have a piece on the rondel. You're selecting from the rondel and you have to pay for the piece you take off. It's kind of rondel adjacent. But those games feel similar to me in terms of that you're building up a system of things and you get benefits from the things that you're building, which then make your later building stuff more efficient if you tie them together. And then we have Shipyard and Pulsar 2849. These each have different sets of systems. I would say, Shipyard in particular is about accumulating a specific set of objects and then seeing how they pay out. Part of what I really like about all of Vladimir Suhi's games, with the exception of League of Six and 20th Century, is the deep set of interlocking systems that you're trying to accumulate as you play. From the first of his super complex games, Shipyard, you had this setup where you're accumulating workers and factory tiles and other things that allow you to make these ships and make them more and more efficient and make interesting choices about how your ship is going to be built, and then try to score points based on a variety of different factors. Shipyard sort of captures this idea of, I have so many things I want to do and I just don't quite have enough stuff to do it with, which ends up being the main thing I really like about Vladimir Suhi's games. In all of his games, it's about managing these interlocking bonuses, trying to find the moment where you can make your system really click together and help you score lots of points. It's a difficult thing to do well, I say as a person who's tried to design lots of games, and Suhi is the master at this. His games are definitely getting better. I would say if you look at the games in the first half and the games in the second half of his career, second half is better. If you look at the last 2 or 3 games versus the 2 or 3 games before that, they're getting better. I still have a really soft spot in my heart for Last Will, but I can't imagine that it's going to stay as high on my top 50 list next time I do it as it did last time I did it, just because the other games are so great. The one thing I think is missing on this first pass as I compare the two, obviously Suhi is not as prolific. I mean, both designers have been designing around the same amount of time. I would say Wallace maybe has 5 or 6 years on Suhi in terms of publications. I think Wallace's earlier games started coming out in the late 90s, and Suhi's League of Six was 2004, I think. So they don't quite overlap, but Wallace easily has 3 times as many games as Suhi does, at least double. And with that volume comes the opportunity to experiment in ways that Suhi hasn't really had a chance to do or taken time to do. And I will say I believe that there are a couple games he's released that I haven't played. I think there was a children's game that came out last year from Delicious Games that might have been his. I did not get a chance to look at that. And like I said, Wallace may have some games that I've never played, or I know he has some games I've never played. He probably has some I've never heard of. That there are just all sorts of different possibilities in that deep catalog. So, but I think the only reasonable way to compare them is to use the games that I have played and that I have on my shelf. Which brings me to the question of, how do I compare them? Part of me thinks like, well, this is a stupid thing to waste my time on. Who cares? On the other hand, it's kind of fun too. It's fun to think deeply about things you love. And I love both of these designers and both their catalogs pretty thoroughly. So I'm keen to figure out the best way to approach them. I guess 2 options I have that I thought of would be to do a head-to-head ranking. So let's say I take all the Martin Wallace games that I've played and I rank them. And I take all the Vladimir Suhi games I've played and I rank them. And then I have them face off, like my top number 1 Martin Wallace game against my number 1 Vladimir Suhi game, which game do I like better and why, and then go down the list that way. That would be one way, I think, that would be interesting. There is an element of theme, comparing different themes, comparing their breadth as a designer in terms of how widely their designs vary and how much they explore the different parts of the field. So yeah, lots of different things to think about as I try to consider which artist holds the spot at the top of my list of designers I like. So one thing I would ask for you, dear listener, what do you think I should add to my consideration? How do you decide? If you have a favorite designer, how have you decided that they're your favorite designer? What did you find about what they're doing to amplify them over what other people are doing? Head over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269 and join the forum there to let me know what you think about how I should make this decision. And also what are your favorite designers and how did you make the decision about that? And also, what's your favorite Martin Wallace game? And what's your favorite Vladimir Suhi game? Leave those things in the comments as well. Maybe that will influence me. Be like, oh, the Pick Up and Deliver crowd really likes MOA. I doubt MOA. Nobody likes that game, really. But I'd love to hear it. So thanks for joining me on my walk today. I hope your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.